Now, it's almost December and Cape Town will be lit, but it's also fire season in the mother city. The city is once again asking for direct access to disaster funds to speed up help for fire victims. In the past, they could give aid within 48 hours, but now they have to apply to national government. eNCA reporter Kevin Brandt joins us with the details. And Kevin, a very warm good morning to you. I mean, what do you have in terms of the season that's upcoming? And we understand, of course, the mother city rather gearing up for a fire season.
A very good morning to you, Tumelo. Well, in the recent past, we've seen how the fire season has impacted various communities here within the city of Cape Town Metropolitan, and how the city has had to intervene and bring relief for the fire victims there. However, that situation has changed ever since the access to disaster relief funding has been centralized under national government, and that is then the request coming from city officials here. They've petitioned and urged the national counterparts to then allow the city officials access to that funding to speed up the process, where they can provide some relief to the residents affected either by flooding or by fire, any disaster, so to speak, on a large scale. That is why the city, in a nutshell, requires access to that funding. But here to give us a bit more detail with regard to their request from national government and also to map out exactly what the city's plans are with regard to that is Human Settlements Mayoral Committee member Carl Popham. Carl, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for your time. Can you just outline why is it important for the city to get access to that disaster relief funding again?
No, absolutely, and thanks, Kevin, for having me, and good day to your viewers. So growing informality is inevitable. We can't stop it. People want to be in Cape Town. They want to get a better access to livelihoods. And so it requires us to mitigate the impact of informality within the city. And that is looking at fires and flooding. And so we need to respond faster so we can do better. But that requires us to access the funding like we used to, where we had a response time of 6 to 48 hours at max. Currently, we're looking at weeks to months on end because it is centralized to Pretoria, and inevitably the response time can't be quick enough for communities to rebuild themselves.
Why has that scenario changed from where the city initially had access to funding to the point where it was now centralized, and how has it impacted the services that the city can render then to disaster victims?
So as MMC, I appreciate that National Minister Kubai has to look at a global view for the entire country, and that's okay. But what we need to appreciate is that when we do these things from Pretoria, there's inevitable delays. And so, yes, there are municipalities around the country where there is malfeasance and corruption and aren't spending the grants the way they need to. But in the city of Cape Town, in this administration, we have shown that we are well governed, that there is a zero tolerance for corruption, and before it was centralized, we were doing the service on our own, and there's a record of delivery. So we're calling on the minister, while we accept the situation she finds ourselves in, trust your local counterparts who can deliver and decentralize it back to the city so we can respond to the most vulnerable of communities.
Carl, just on a more practical level, what exactly are the material that is needed to then provide, say for instance, in a situation where there's been a fire or a flood, what are the specific materials that the city will be providing to the affected residents?
Absolutely, Kevin, and we've experienced, you've been covering the stories, whether it's in Salaris Pass, whether it's in Dunoon, whether it's in Kailicha. We've seen communities rebuilding after the city has cleared their sites with the old materials, these inferior materials that are dangerous. And so when we lead this process, we provide fire retardant structures that at least allow the effect of a singular fire to not infect an entire settlement. We ensure that there is a bigger level of dignity with doors and windows and good ventilation for those structures. But more importantly, when we plan the delivery of those structures, there's at least a sense of fire breaks in between to mitigate the impact of fires. But on top of that, we're delivering electrified settlements, which is the main cause of fires within informal settlements. But when we look at the budget cuts that we've seen in the last 2 weeks, 100 million rand to the city of Cape Town, around about 39 million rand for informal settlements upgrade. I don't need to cut back on the delivery of informal settlements because I just don't have the money. Now the funding for disaster relief becomes even more essential because these are the most poor residents in our city, the residents who are the most vulnerable. They deserve better, and they need to know that the city sees them, we hear them, and we're going to fight for this issue.
Just on a more preventative, from a more preventative point of view, what interventions are at play or in place to ensure that awareness is being created to ahead of the disaster actually striking it? I'm in particular referring to a fire. What interventions does the city have to make residents aware of fire safety?
Absolutely. We work very closely with our colleagues in disaster management and safety and security to make sure there's preventative awareness programs across informal settlements. I've taken the decision, I've just been appointed 2 months ago, there is no holiday this December. I need to be on the ground with communities to make sure that they're aware of the impact of actions and the cause of fires, but also making sure that we pull partners from the public sector to see how can we assist informal settlements to get more fire retardant structures up. We know that the festive season is always plagued with fires in Cape Town with the dry, windy climate that we have. And so we're going to be on the ground for this festive period, making sure informal settlements are informed about what they can do on their own, but also seeing what we can do to take further delivery. But most essential would be decentralizing that fund that's currently at the National Ministry and trusting Cape Town to deliver as they have.
Carl, can you just wrap up for us with an overview of what exactly is the status of those residents affected in Salauri's Pass? I believe that the number of families have had to be moved to a temporary relocation area, waiting permanent removal to a specific spot still within that community.
Yeah, so that was one of my first disasters. It was actually the first disaster, and so it was a priority for me. We've put the residents from Pinetown and eNCA, which are the informal settlements in Salauri Pass, in what we call incremental development areas or temporary housing scenarios. We've identified land for relocation, and we are currently reserving that internally in the city. We are in the concluding phase. The teams are ready to go to prepare the site and to go put new structures in designated spots and plots for those residents. But it's very important that the community works with me, that they work with the city. We are not going to allow rebuilding in areas where we know there will be another flood. It's not acceptable, it's not right, and I understand it's difficult to move, but your safety comes first, and that's the priority for the city of Cape Town.
Sorry, I have one last question. Just when was the request forwarded to national government for access to that funding, and have you had any response from them as yet?
1 week after the flood, we've already written. You can appreciate because the floods were across the metro, things were a bit chaotic. We needed to stabilize. And so within that week, after we had our first interview, we had written. We had officials come down to do assessments, to engage, but now we're waiting for delivery. And that's the issue when it is centralized outside of Cape Town, thousands of kilometers in Pretoria.
No clarity yet from the ministry in terms of whether or not your request will be entertained at all?
Regarding the recent...
regarding the access to the funding?
No, we haven't got a response, but it's important to note that before my appointment, there has been communication to the National Minister to discuss this issue. We haven't received a response to that initial letter. I've decided to pick it up again because it's actually becoming of life and death importance.
Appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Carl Popham, the Mayoral Committee Member for Human Settlements here at the City of Cape Town, giving us an overview of the city's position when it comes to access to that disaster relief funding, saying that the process is simply slowed down too much if it's being centralized under national government. Tumelo?
Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for bringing this to the fore, given the fact that fire season seems to be upon the mother city. Kevin Brandt for us. Thank you so much for that report, colleague. With that being said, more to come when we come back. We'll be right back.